New Thought Media Network. We are a global broadcast network of positive music, media, and entertainment, inspiring humanity's evolution along the journey of enlightenment and creating a world of love, peace, empowerment, and prosperity for all. New Thought Media Network. Positively inspiring.
And dear ones, Dr. Robert with you over here.
Rev Z right here.
And this is New Thought today for Tuesday, the 20th of August. Yes, that is right. August 20th.
Yeah, it is right.
And it's Tuesday, it's 2 o'clock. So that must mean that it's time to kick back, relax, grab a beverage, and have a deeper dive conversation with my dear brother, Elzia. As well, we're going to look at the future of New Thought ministerial education today, huh?
Yeah. There's a stirring, for lack of a better word, where I think the New Thought community is looking at how do we better get our message out, how do we better serve our current communities, and you know what that's like. And so I think one of those avenues is to look at the training and see what's available, and you know, see how people can utilize it. So I think that's a great place to start.
Yeah, absolutely. And we're going to start by making sure everybody out there knows, if you're watching live, feel free to chime along, chat along. Hit the like, share, and subscribe button. Let some other folks know what we're talking about here today. If you're watching on a replay, thank you so much. Feel free to like and share and subscribe and do all those things as well. And if you have a specific question, drop a comment. We'll see it even after the fact and do our best to get back to you with an answer on any questions you might have about what we're talking about here today. So, and again, we are going to talk about the future of ministerial education in the New Thought movement, because something unexpected happened, let's call it, this last week or so, and that is that the Centers for Spiritual Living have announced that they are closing the Holmes Institute. Now, before we all rush into, oh my God, what does that mean? We want to make sure that some things are really, really clear. Number one, the Holmes Institute, 4 or 5 years ago now, probably, was kind of split off from all of the education, and CSL has been operating with two distinct programs. One is the Holmes Institute. That's the place where you can get it, or could get, an accredited master's degree program. And then there's the School for Spiritual Leadership, which is an unaccredited program. And that's more the nuts and the bolts about doing church and operating a traditional church and how to do ministry. So what CSL has announced is they're letting go of the master's degree program. The master's degree that both Reverend Elzia and I have and worked very hard for will no longer be available. And students in that program are already working towards being placed with other programs of a similar nature, one of which is I believe, I don't have this directly, but I believe Emerson Institute would qualify for those placements, as they do have a master's program. And we're going to talk about that a little later. However, all of this, and if you really want to know an awful lot more, probably more than anybody needs to, there's going to be a community call with the Centers for Spiritual Living next Monday or Tuesday, the 26th.
Next Monday.
Monday. There's going to be a community call. If you'd like more information on that, just let us know. I don't think I'm going to be able to be there because I think I'm hosting on another show that day. So, and with all of that, the School of Spiritual Leadership with Centers for Spiritual Living is going to continue. That will not be interrupted or changed in any meaningful way that we've heard so far. And then, and that led LZ and I to this conversation of, okay, what is out there and what is available? And for those that want to take the study of metaphysics or New Thought to a much, much deeper level, what's available?
Right.
And Z, that's what we've been working on. So why don't you tell folks a little bit about what we found so far?
Oh boy. You know, there's quite a few different avenues, for lack of a better word, of how one can begin to study the foundational movements or the foundational teachings of New Thought metaphysics, if you will, based on, you know, Quimby's work and Mary Baker Eddy and the Fillmores and Holmes and, you know, a few others, Barbara King, Dr. Barbara King, Dr. Johnny Coleman. So there's a lot of stuff out there. Some of it's accredited, if you will. Some of it does not appear to be. It's more of a metaphysical training in terms of getting grounded in the material. So it's you know, it's hard, I'll say, or there's a bit of work to be done to go through and vet all of these, right, to see what they are. Now we know Emerson Institute has that program that provides a master's, but Unity has a program. Barbara King's School of Ministry, as far as I can tell, is still there. So is Dr. Johnny Coleman's School of Ministry or Seminary. And so there are a lot of options, from a degree program to a more certificated programs that are available. I mean, there's some that, you know, I have not heard of. There's an International Metaphysics Ministry that has a school, and it says it has an accreditation. And so, you know, these kinds of things take a little bit of work to go down and look at the accreditation to see exactly what they offer. And it's quite expensive to do an accreditation. Having been a former professor at a university, going through that at that level, it takes a lot of work, and which inevitably means some cost, right? And so the question becomes, you know, what are we trying to offer? Is this is there a break even or a payoff for doing this? And so that's where we are. And so that's a broad sweep on the whole process of that, or what's available. And so it's interesting. I'm not sure, you know, would love to see or hear from anyone that's in any New Thought ministerial program and what they might think about their program, about the process. Someone who may be looking, or somewhere who may need to transfer as a result of the movement of the landscape.
Yes. I think it's going to be a number of, there already are a number of people asking questions about where, okay, so where do I go? What do I do? What do I do with what I have so far? And, you know, to me, it's really interesting. We did a very cursory search for New Thought ministerial education. But what we also know is, over the last handful of years, Centers for Spiritual Living has become a little more open, let's say, to accepting ministerial degrees from other communities or other organizations. We didn't even mention Agape and their ministerial program. And and CSO has been more open to allowing interfaith ministers, people with degrees from, say, One Spirit, the school in New York State, and other, I'm going to say, a little more esoteric type schools based on, well, consciousness. And that's a good thing, in my opinion. There doesn't need to be just one way to get to an REV in front of your name. And however, it is a very confusing landscape, because if we look at even Unity has differing avenues of how to attain a ministerial degree. There's Unity Ministerial Institute, and there is also Unity Urban Ministerial Training, and the Urban School, as I keep hearing it referred to. Now, I will say, I talk to more people that seem to be going to the Urban School than are going to their traditional school, if you will. And all of this kind of leads me to the concept of, how is it even possible to come to a universally accepted education program in the New Thought arena? We know it's expensive to maintain these degree certifications. We found a dozen different schools that are all spending various degrees of resources and money to train people in a somewhat specific belief system or theology, if you will. What do you think, Z? Is it even possible to have one unifying program, one ring to rule them all, as it were?
Yeah, I mean, having been in that academic world for a minute, it becomes a challenge to have one university, right? As we look around, we have tons of universities, from 2-year all the way up to, PhDs. And if we look at it from that perspective, all of these universities have specialties, right? You may go to a university and it has all of the basic stuff, and it has engineering, and so does School B have engineering, but we may focus on aeronautical engineering. They may focus on, mechanical engineering. And then you have a school like we have here in Colorado School of Mines, that's all they teach, all the various type of engineering schools, right? And so then there's some cross-pollination that goes on there, or a foundation that takes place or that is available regardless of the branch of engineering you go in. So I mean, there could definitely, I believe, be a foundational piece that allows you to get a, almost like a 2-year degree, a community college, a junior college degree, and then you transfer in to another university is one way of possibly looking at it, right? Because Dr. Johnny Coleman's approach to this New Thought material, right, is very different from, say, Barbara King, right? Yeah. And so, she met Dr. Coleman. So Barbara King was kind of like a mentor or offshoot, if you will. I don't know how the best way to say that, of Dr. Johnny Coleman.
Right. And we want to be you and I have always known the unity side of, there are still those aspects of the New Thought world that are much more based and practicing, quote, a Christian theology. Centers for Spiritual Living has always been a little more towards the science side. Unfortunately, that's many of the classes that we're losing in this deal.
Yep.
are the scientific based classes, the classes that are a bit more consciousness studies. But so, and let's remember, Z, you sit on the board of a another institution, the Iliff School of Theology here in Denver, where part of a major institution, a major accreditation to go to the Iliff School, and you're on the board there, getting that behind the scenes view of an even bigger, much bigger program than even all the things we're talking about combined. If you took all the New Thought students in the world right now and put them all together, and it still wouldn't come close to what the enrollment is at the Iliff School, right? So it seems like there's a lot of moving parts.
Yeah.
And so I get the question becomes, are we rushing to try to find a unifying organization, or would we be better off with 30 or 40 different schools all teaching their own thing and then leave it up to the individual centers to determine if someone's education is good enough or not?
Yeah, I wouldn't subscribe to that. Because one thing I do know from a ministerial seminary kind of education, I think a lot of schools, regardless of their denomination, if you will, are having challenges of attracting and having students matriculate through their systems, right? Because, of course, I'm not an expert on theological universities. However, I would submit that a lot of them are dealing with, as every other system in our environment, a changing of the guard, i.e. changing of the generation, changing of the thoughts about what ministry and spiritual institutions and religious institutions should provide and how they go about doing that, right? And so I think, all of these types of programs, even the big ones, right? Like maybe a University of Chicago theological institution, or some of the Baptist theological institutions. I would submit that all of them are looking at and trying to determine how the magic word here, how do we make this relevant?
Yeah, there we go.
And the second add-on to that would be, real quick, is how do we become servants of the Lord, if you will, regardless of your denomination, to focus mainly on servicing people to actualize themselves, to come up out of a situation that may be challenging, and to create a brotherhood and sisterhood, i.e. a community that is supportive and uplifting and providing some opportunities for people to, as they say, self-actualize.
Yeah, exactly. You hit on that word relevant, and to me, that's something that is so important. And not just to say, is this information relevant to our lives and to the world and to today's environment out there? But how do we help people, train leaders, support leaders to continually stay on that growing edge of relevancy? To not get complacent and fall into that place of, well, this is what we've been doing for 10 years. And, if it ain't broke, well, a lot of times those stress fractures don't show up until after 10 or 15 years. But if you had done some maintenance at year 5 and 10 and 12, you wouldn't have the problems. So, right, we get complacent in that's the way it's always been. And truthfully, I mean, I fall into this. I didn't think I would see a day where we didn't have a Holmes Institute. Where CSL just said, nope, we're done. Not working anymore. And, they point in so far in their explanations, they point to a lot of things: declining enrollment, the costs associated were not balanced or in alignment with the fees being charged to students. larger organization was underwriting some of those financial losses and was managing some of those financial losses due to again high costs and lower enrollment at a skewed cost. We were undercharging and not getting enough people to play the volume game. And at that point, any organization or business is going to fall on hard times.
And you know, one of the things that I think all spiritual/religious institutions are dealing with, two big things. One is, well, three. One is the first one I mentioned, the relevancy. The second one would be the whole DEIB confluence of activities. And the third one is, oh man, it just slipped my head. Relevancy, DEIB, oh yes. And the other one is social action. Those three things, I believe, are very pivotal right now in terms of religious/spiritual studies, teaching, education, because those are facing people. You know, it used to be hunger, and we still have hunger problems. It used to be housing, and we still have housing problems. But even those things begin to break down into DEIB, where we start hearing about food deserts in certain communities, or we still hear about people being classified and ostracized based on some particular approach that they have to life.
Yep.
And the religion, spirituality stuff is supposed to be, as I understand it through my training, it is a unifying platform of one golden rule. I am my brothers and sisters' keeper, period.
Yeah.
Meaning that we are connected, that we have to work together. Anybody and everybody goes through peaks and valleys, but in a community, we can survive that and allow everybody to have that moment where they learn, grow, or remember, grow, and be active in the community.
Yep. Hey, our dear friend Cynthia Paulson's joining us in the conversation. Thank you, Cynthia. Great seeing you. And says, love this topic. My perspective is to consider what the goal is. I'm not sure we know. Is the goal to print certificates and degrees, or is the goal to shift the consciousness of the world and bring about an awakening? And, you know, I can say that in reading a number of different short articles, let's say blog posts, in a unprepared blog post by a lot of ministers this past week, there was a belief when Holmes Institute was first started, when the movement, what was United Centers for Spiritual Living came to the idea, and I think it might even have been UCRS back then, came to the idea of having an accredited master's degree program, as it would allow ministers to present themselves at a higher level of education, that would allow ministers to present themselves in a way that we believed would bring about greater respect in, quote, the outside or the real world, or in the business world, or in other communities. I don't know that ever happened. I got to be honest. I don't know that having a master's in consciousness studies ever actually opened a door for me out in, again, the traditional real world, as they call it. And maybe in that regard, we went down the road of, let's make sure people are certificated. Let's make sure people have degrees. And perhaps we lost a little bit of that focus. I can't say for sure, because I think we all got into it for different reasons and in different avenues, and just, you know, not to dox you or anything, Cynthia. I know you've gone through your own unique path of ministry and education, and how certain organizations or others will or will not accept that education as valid, as worthy. So for me, Z, when you start bringing in the B word and we start talking about belonging, that really strikes for me, because I think part of it is creating centers and spaces of belonging. And if you don't feel like you belong to the whole, to the greater, it's going to be harder and harder to do that.
Mm-hmm. And, you know, I think as I heard you talking about the prayer, as Cynthia did, about, you know, what's the purpose? You know, I think I look at Holmes Institute, and the reason I went through the master's program, one, I enjoyed the study, and I enjoyed the foundational piece of it, of the sciences piece, right? We took classes in quantum physics, we took classes in various scientific, you know, the method and ways of thinking or ways of knowing. There were classes that allowed, based on the foundational teaching of Ernest Holmes, and that statement at the very first sentence of the book: I look forward to the day when religion and spirituality can walk hand in hand from the visible into the invisible. And there's nothing that deals with the invisible more tangibly than science, right? And that has been proven out now through quantum physics. But I think back, as you said, at that earliest point, in that Ernest, as I understand it and studied, in the very beginning, this was a teaching methodology to people, for people to actualize, right? So they had study groups, and it was a working kind of thing, right? Whereas now, if you move away from that and you get to the teaching part or the educational part, ideally the motive was to have teachers who were versed in various technologies and studies, to be able to infuse these classes of how people could use it, and how it elevated itself from the early 1900s to the early 2000s, and how they're relevant, right? How they work together. But I think potentially somewhere down the road, it became a means of trying to, like any other degree, to move up a wrong of whatever that wrong is, right? And so now it becomes something different.
Right. Exactly. Yeah, it was a way to validate, and a way to help us believe we could make a living doing this. All right. We're going to take a break, folks, and come back and talk some more about this, because I might say something I shouldn't if we don't. And but I do want to continue on this thread, so we're going to do that after the break. However, please stay with us. We got to take just a minute or so to let you know a little bit more about some of our sponsors and some of the things going on here at the New Thought Media Network. If you want to join in the conversation, let us know. We'd love to have you join in with us in the next segment. Just reach out, send us a message. Otherwise, I'm going to play a couple commercials. We'll be right back. Stay tuned. More of New Thought Today right after the break.
The New Thought Men's community proudly presents New Thought Men's Summit, Foundations, an online conference, September 22nd through 27th. Register today at www.newthoughtmens.community, featuring 22 New Thought speakers, ministers, and visionaries, sharing their wisdom of modern spiritual masculinity. New Thought Men's community, empowering wholeness, centered in spiritual living.
Yes, folks, we want to take a moment to just let you know a little bit more about the upcoming New Thought Men's Summit. Both Reverend Elzia and I are presenting in this 5-day, 22 speakers. Look at that lineup of New Thought ministers that are going to be sharing their wisdom on a host of topics. You can register today at newthoughtmens.community. That's newthoughtmens.community. I know it's a little tough to see on that image there. Make sure you can put the dot in there. And this is for everyone. So ladies, you might know of a man that would like to attend, and or you might like to attend just to see what's happening with the Thought on Men's community in New Thought. It is free to sign up, and everybody's welcome. So join us on the 22nd through the 27th of September, coming up right around the corner. So, okay, Z. So back to, we were talking in this whole education piece, and I want to be really clear. When I got in, I didn't have a choice or not. There was no, there was one pathway, and you took the master's degree program, and you took the school, what is now the School of Spiritual Leadership. But at the time, it was all one program, and it was, and I know because you were there side by side with me for most of it. You got in a little early, and therefore got out a little bit earlier than I did. But the opportunity to just do a certificate or just do the School of Ministry without the Holmes Institute piece wasn't really there. So I do want to applaud CSL, because when you and I did this, it was tens, not just 10, but tens of thousands of dollars, including travel and books and required attendance at different events. And those were all expensive to begin with, and took a pop every time you had to go somewhere. I do like that over time, we're getting to a perhaps simplified model, not just CSL, but everywhere, getting to a little bit more of a simplified model of this is what you need. This is what's necessary to stand in the world of New Thought as a spiritual leader, as a minister, as a reverend. And most of the schools I'm familiar with really do encourage continuing education beyond that. And I'm preparing to teach a course right now for the Emerson Institute that will be starting in just a couple of weeks on a visioning program. It's a 10-week program. Might as well throw that image up there too. That's going to happen. We have a couple of offerings, Tuesday during the day or Thursdays during the evenings. With the advent of virtual education and more people having had a decade of using virtual education or more now. I think New Thought was a little late to the party in this regard, but as more and more teachers are more and more comfortable in the virtual world, we seem to be streamlining, and we seem to be coming to a more cohesive, hey, these are at least the bare minimums. And then where do you want to specialize?
Right. And you know, while we were on the break, I went and looked, because I was curious, on other, enrollments at some noted theological schools. So the University of Chicago, they have 200, and I don't know how relevant these numbers in terms of whether it's last year or the year before in terms of the numbers of enrollments. But from this site, I was able to go to and look at that. University of Chicago Theological, 226 students. Harvard has 317. Duke has 624. Iliff has about 171, 172. Now, all of those are small numbers when you start comparing that to some traditional fundamental teachings like Liberty University. Okay, right. Liberty University has 5,507 according to this particular listing. And so all those numbers are relatively small.
Yeah.
Except for Liberty, right? And so I think the question comes down to, is someone looking to be a theologian, right? Which would begin to necessitate a master's and maybe a PhD degree to start really studying and teaching and writing on theological subjects, the existence of God, how do we communicate, all these theological approaches.
Right.
If you're looking to run a center or a church or a mosque or a temple, then you still may want a master's degree, but that would probably, I would think, start dealing with, counseling, ministerial counseling, and that may be one of the things, or financial aspects of running a church. So you would have some history of your denomination, for lack of a better way of saying it, but then it would be about how do I run an effective community and be a servant to my congregation or my
Right.
community, right? And so those are two totally different things, but definitely if you're going down you could probably, from a bachelor's degree in ministerial training, if you will, provide the stuff to run a community. And then if you want to get more into counseling and that kind of thing, okay, now you're going to need a better degree or a more specific degree. I won't say better, more specific in terms of counseling and all of the legal stuff that goes there. And then if you're looking to go into theological stuff, you're going to need the master's and the PhD, ideally.
So ultimately,
it really depends, as you said earlier, what is the person looking for?
right. So we're going to end up specializing, because what you didn't mention in there, and I know it wasn't far from your mind, is what we're finding in virtual ministry and what we're finding in focus ministry, where I have a ton of pastoral care training. It was never my quote calling, and it was believed that it would be absolutely necessary to my future of ministry. The truth is, not so much.
Right.
And when somebody that I'm familiar with has a deep pastoral need, more often than not, I'm going to refer that person to somebody else that I know that is really good at that. That this is what they do.
Yeah.
Right. In the old days, ministers had to do everything, and we were taught that, right? From baptize them, marry them, and bury them, all the way through. Right. And number one, people don't very rarely, I should say, stay with the same spiritual community from birth to death anymore. That isn't anywhere near what it used to be. And ministers staying in one place from birth to death isn't what it used to be. And so as the necessity on how to minister changes, I think we do need to see unique schools of ministry. That I would have loved more classes on virtual education. I would have loved more classes on virtual fundraising, because they're different animals than you got 100 people in the room and you can pass the plate and you can count on at least $5 average per person, right? Or whatever the occasions were. So it makes it it sounds like maybe we need to open up a school of virtual.
Well, and those are the things we just found, right? With the Emerson Institute and some of the most of those, the Unity, some of them like we had the virtual or regional classes, as we call them, where you would come together and participate in functional or operational wherewithal, right?
Right.
For a center. And then when we got more into the science and some of those areas, it was typically a college professor at some university. I mean, we had some great professors, who did those classes, Dr. Goswami, and others. And so, and I thought about when you look at seminaries, right, you get certain people and they go in and they specialize in the Old Testament, right? Or You get some who, from a traditional Christian perspective, they just deal with the teachings of Paul, or they just deal with the New Testament and the teachings of Jesus, right? So at that point, that's more of a intellectual, educational, personal gratification, but it has nothing to do with running a community. Now, like you said, with the counseling, so if someone really got deep into counseling or wanted to go down that path, often they took a path of chaplaincy, right? So, so they got more in depth into dealing with families and individual crises and people that are in hospice. You know, so now that's a specialty that is more suited for a community, whether it's at large or in a one place.
And that brings forward an interesting point for me, because I'm associated with a gentleman here in Colorado who went through the Centers for Spiritual Living online practitioner program and education, never went on to ministerial school, because it was during that program that he heard the call to chaplaincy.
Mm-hmm.
And rather than entering the CSL ministerial program, he moved into a chaplaincy program. Now, this is many years ago now, too. And he has had a very fulfilling career in his local community as a chaplain. It wasn't just an internship. It wasn't just a fly-by-night. He's been with the same company, in the same community for a couple of decades now in this regard. And in that way, he has really been an example of how we can take this education and use it to influence a greater population in the world.
Mm-hmm.
And kind of back to Cynthia's question, right? Is our goal to create, quote, validation for our people, or is it to provide people the tools and the resources and the wisdom and the consciousness to go forth and change the world? And I think it's the latter.
Right. Yeah. And I, you know, for me, I grew up in the South, and different whole kind of religious experience in some respects. And one of the things that was apparent to me is ministry is about service. Now, you know, does a minister need to take care of his family or her family and all of that? Yes. So there is definitely some compensation that needs to be there, and how that happens, I don't want to try to state what that is, but most of the ministers that I knew growing up, they had a full-time job somewhere, and they basically had 2 full-time jobs. There were very few ministers who were full-time ministers. If they were in the Black community, they had a pretty large congregation, and 8 times out of 10, they were involved in the civil rights movement. They were involved on social justice, social action front, right? Yeah. And you know, we've almost come full circle, and I'm gonna definitely take a step sideways here for just a minute to prove a point. In that they had the Democratic Convention start, and they brought up constantly the whole Democratic Convention in Chicago that happened in '68, right? Right. Very different times from now, but the atmosphere and the climate that we are living in are very similar. People are dissatisfied, yada, yada, yada. They want more, social justice issues dealt with, so forth. And so parallel, I believe, we're at this shifting point, this nexus point that says in 50 years, roughly, things have changed. And we now have to reevaluate, right size, pick a word that means the most and has the best starting point to how we do things at any level of existence. And that if we believe in a supreme being, a power, an intelligence that is beyond anything we can comprehend, we need to have an approach to approach it, if you will. And we need to have a way of helping others disseminate a way of disseminating that so people can ingest it and begin to live, as a community.
Yeah, exactly. Cynthia's agreeing. Yes, ministers have bills to pay too. It takes a lot of faith to know this spiritual work can lead to a prosperous life, but that's the point of the study. And I think there's nothing that gets in the way of a great minister more than the need for a full-time job outside of ministry.
Mm-hmm.
I know far, in my opinion, from my perspective, I knew far, and I'm going to be straight up honest, folks. I scrape month to month. I live month to month in this job because I'm not willing to go outside of ministry to just go make money. And there's so many ministers in the same seat I sit in, and so many ministers that sit in the same seat you do, Elzia. Mm-hmm. Down a full-time job, leading a community, serving outside of your spiritual community, but in the greater community as well. And I have often said you are the hardest working man I know, because you've demonstrated that to me. And I think to myself, how much less you would have to do if ministry paid you what your corporate job pays you.
Right.
How less you would really have to work and how much more impact you'd be able to make.
Yes.
And I know that for so many of us, that if we took the financial constraints off, the amount of good that would be done in this world would exponentially increase our journey towards enlightenment.
Yes. Yes. And that's interesting because we have this I mean, we have to take care of ourselves, our kids. They got to go to school. School ain't cheap. I don't care what kind of school you send them to. And it becomes this yin and yang, if you will. How do we find the balance? How do we begin to, make this thing work? And one thing I'll throw in the mix is this whole thing of, we've heard it a gazillion times, recovery from COVID. COVID put a full stop on everything, right? And as a result of that, we had to rethink the way we did everything for almost 3.5 years. And now people have awakened. I don't want to go into the whole wake thing, but people, whether they want to call it awakening or not, people have woke up to different ways of doing things, different ways of employment, whether I need to be in a building or not, different ways of shopping, different ways of all manner of things, which requires us to make a fundamental change, because we're never going back to what it was before that on any front. And so the sooner we can embrace that, the better we'll be. I'll stop there.
All right, time for my detour, because I think part of what you're speaking to is also directly related to what we're experiencing in our political system right now. I was recently introduced to an article. It's an op-ed. It originally appeared in the Daily Beast a little over a year ago, May 20th of 23. It says the left needs a spiritual renaissance, and so does America. I'm going to drop the link in the comments right now for you folks if you want to take a look at that. And I think it's an important read because it's written by a senator and in collaboration with another gentleman who has more of has a Harvard Divinity School degree. So we've got the spiritual and we've got the political in there. And a huge part of what they're talking about is that we need a spiritual renaissance because we can't go back to what it was. And really, in many ways, they're speaking that the neoliberalism experiment has in many ways failed. And people are not feeling separated, but both left and right have a feeling of being destitute in our current system. We can't go back. It's not possible. And so we have to blaze a new vision forward. And how are we going to do that?
You know, you said the magic word, and we have to come back and do a whole show on this. The whole idea of the Renaissance, right? So, because when we look at New Thought is an outbirthing, if you will, of the Renaissance. What happened during the Renaissance when we had all these discoveries? And before, you know, if you got sick, people say, oh, we need to stick some leeches on you. If we put enough leeches on you, you're going to get better. Well, no, that ain't going to fix, you know, polio or whatever, right? And then there was a Renaissance where all of this information began to appear and debunk some of the old ideas. And this whole movement that started the New Thought, the Enlightenment period, which was an extension of the Renaissance, from Copernicus and Galileo and all of the ones we know. We have what we have right now, right? This computer internet thing is an outshoot of that Renaissance, right? The way we handle medicine and x-rays and all of this. So that same thing is now in the cycle of life, his cycle back up to the top of the hopper and says, okay, you're up again. How are we going to be Renaissance workers in this new way of living, whether it's spiritual, religious, whether it's political, whether it's educational, whether it's economical, because this spiritual, religious stuff is supposed to help guide you and inform you of all aspects of life.
I just scheduled October 1st as the New Thought Renaissance program. I agree with you. We need a whole program on this, because to me, what you just described is the necessity for real social action in our communities and in our philosophy on all the various aspects. But we do need to take another quick break, folks, and say thank you to our organizational sponsors and individual donors. Help us do that. Don't go away, however. We're coming right back after this message with more of New Thought Today and our final thoughts for today's conversation. Stay with us. We'll be right back.
Please help us say thank you to our organizational sponsors, including the Hefferland Foundation, Affiliated New Thought Network, International New Thought Alliance, Science of Mind Archives and Library Foundation, Center for Spiritual Living Denver, Center for Spiritual Living Midtown, New Thought Philadelphia, Planned Happiness Institute, Summit Center for Spiritual Living, One Heart Retreats, Center for Spiritual Living on the Lake, Unity Kitchener, Unity Spiritual Center Ottawa, Om Center for Spiritual Living, Satya Center, Begin Within Ministries, Center for Spiritual Living North Jersey, Unity of Savannah, and the Center for Spiritual Living Seattle, as well as all of our individual donors. Thank you for being part of the New Thought Media Network. Please like, share, and subscribe. New Thought Media Network, positively inspiring.
Yes. Thank you to all of our organizational sponsors and individual donors. It's thanks to folks and organizations like you that keep us on the air and sharing these great conversations around the world. Together, we are evolving New Thought, and together we are creating a world that works for all. We appreciate your support financially and sharing what we're doing here on the network. All right, Z, what a wide-ranging conversation here today. I love it, because we started by looking at the future of ministerial education in the New Thought movement, and we end with the necessity for New Thought to be active in the world and active in the social constructs and the social systems of everything. It leads me to that deeply we are one piece. So I'm going to go first on my final thoughts today. And that is simply much of what I just shared. Now is the time, I believe, for new thought. I think we're at a great nexus of change. Some see it coming, some don't. Some organizations are feeling it right now. Some haven't yet, but will. Others have already gone through the changes. And there's a lot of really good stuff on the horizon. But now is the time for each of us to identify that place of specialization, that place where we inherently know we are called to serve and support, bringing the new thought consciousness, not just to ourselves, but into the organizations that we're connected with, into our individual communities. That is how we create a world that works for all.
Yeah, and I think for me, take some time, everyone, and go look at two things. What took place and what led up to the Renaissance, and ask, how can I serve? It doesn't have to be in a so-called traditional spiritual religious context, because everything you do is spiritual and religious. So find something that charges you, that you're passionate about, that builds a supportive community that creates and supports life for everything, creating this world that works for all. And I think we'll be able to shift some gears and turn some corners, man, that'll really give us a wonderful life, as they say.
Yes. All right, folks, we're going to get out of here for now. However, we do invite you to keep coming back. We have a new friend joining us next week, a gentleman named Papa Jack. We're going to introduce you to him and his work. And interestingly, you find all kinds of interesting people find us here at New Thought Media Network. And Papa Jack lives almost about halfway between Reverend Elzia and I. And none of us have ever met. So we're going to introduce you to Papa Jack next week here on New Thought Today. Please check back and join us. Cynthia, great to have you with us today. Thanks for sharing your insights and thoughts. And please know you're welcome to come join us on camera live at any time. Well, when we have an opening. So let us know when you'd like to come on. We'd love to have you on the show. All right, folks, that's all we've got time for. We're going to get out of here for now. Until next time, thanks for being with us, and we wish you peace and richest blessings. Bye now.